أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وليمحص الله الذين آمنوا ويمحق الكافرين أم حسبتم أن تدخلوا الجنة ولما يعلم الله الذين جاهدوا منكم ويعلم الصابرين ولقد كنتم تمنون الموت من قبل أن تلقوه فقد رأيتموه وأنتم تنظرون. Do you suppose that you will enter heaven while Allah has not yet caused to be distinguished those of you that strive in the way of Allah and has not yet caused to be distinguished the steadfast? And you used to wish for such a death before you met it. Now you have seen it face to face, then why do some of you seek to avoid it? The first verse perhaps I omitted to translate. There is 142nd. And that Allah may purify those who believe and destroy the disbelievers. The translation which I have read out to you can be improved, but there are some difficulties which are faced by general translators as to how tanzurun should be translated in this context. That is why you can't say it altogether wrong, but I would have much preferred a different translation, but of that I'll speak later on. Let's turn to the word mahasa. You mahasuttam hisan, or let me see how it works out. Mahasa mahsan, and the past tense is mahasa. Mahsan is infinitive. So in the general past tense, when you say mahasa, it means somebody ran away quickly, disappeared. Like a deer, when it quickly runs away into the bush and disappears from the sight, the word mahasa is used in describing this phenomenon. Al-mahso khulusu shay, for the purification of something is referred to in Arabic as al-mahas. Mahasa wa mahasa, both are also in transitive forms. Mahasa means to disappear, to run away in the intransitive form. When somebody has done the act of mahas, but when it is used in transitive, then it means that somebody has removed something from something else. That is to say, cause something to run away and flee and quit something altogether. So it is in this tense, in this form, that the Holy Quran has used the word وَلِيُمَحِصَ اللَّهُ, so that Allah may cause something to totally disappear. And when it is used about somebody in relation to someone else, it indicates removal of defects and faults. Even when it is applied to inanimate objects such as ores and metals, when the Arab says somebody mahasa something, it means smeltered it, burned the impurities out and purified it through a process which is, if the things were live, would be painful. So again, also in application to human situation, it has that connotation of a little suffering. Purification, but not altogether arbitrarily, while the one who is purified has not participated in some way. So yumahisa can be applied to situations where there is trial involved. Like Hazrat Muslim Maud in one of his verses says, जब सोना आग में पड़ता है तो कुंदन बन के निकलता है, फिर गालियों से क्यों डरते हो, दिल जलते हैं जल जाने दो. When the gold is smelted and put into fire, it comes out with purification and much more excellence than before. Kundan ban ke nikalta hai. So when you are abused and put to torture and insulted, why should you be afraid of it? It is because Allah wants to purify you and bring out the best in you, like the smelting of an ore. So this is the meaning of Mahasa. Yumahisa, in this context, the real meaning is this, but there are other meanings also, having the same, of course, underlying central spirit of something, to run away when intransitive, to purify when intransitive. So as I said, the Arabs, when they use it regarding others, also have that connotation of trial. So when somebody says Mahasa Fulanan, it means somebody put somebody else to test, made him go through a trial. Mahasallahu Taiba, God forgave that the person who turned to him seeking forgiveness, is also applied in the same sense that there is an effort on the part of the one who seeks forgiveness. First he intends to turn away from sin and purify himself. So it is his own personal suffering which earns him, if the word earn can be rightly applicable to Allah's forgiveness, but in a sort of, he has some share to play, some part to play in that, and that is through his inner suffering. That earns him the pardon of Allah, which when given purifies him. Mahasa again has the same connotation. Tamahasata. Tamahasata means, tamahasat is zalmao, for instance. Tamahasat is zalmao. It's an inflected form of the same four-lettered word. It means the darkness began to turn into light. Amhasat is shamso, when the sun, when the moon, the sun, having gone into eclipse, begins to come out of it, then it can be described as tamahasat. Amhasat is shams. Mahasa Saifa, somebody polished the sword. Mahasal Marido, when the patient is in the process to recovery and health. Al-Mahso also means somebody, means for someone to be strongly limbed and strongly jointed. Somebody who is toughly built, that build of a person is described as al-mahs. So again, it has the same connotation of coming out of trial with success, so that you are strengthened rather than weakened. On the contrary, the word mahaq, which is used in this verse, وَلِيَمْحَقَ الْكَافِرِينَ, has exactly the opposite meaning. Although similar in some ways, the resultant meaning is absolutely the opposite. Mahaka also means to, like Mahasa, to remove, to wipe out, but not the defects, but the person himself on whom the act of Mahaka is taking part. So Yamhaka does not mean that to remove something from someone, but remove the person himself, to annihilate him, to destroy him altogether. So in this sense, the Holy Quran says, وَيَمْحَقَ الْكَافِرِينَ. So similar words are used. The act of removal is common to both, but in the first case, the act of removal is regarding the impurities and the weaknesses of the believers, and in the second form, Mahaka means to remove the disbelievers altogether, that is to destroy them, to annihilate them, as if they were the impurities. So it has, as I said, similar process described, but resulting into completely different objectives. Mahakashya, also to reduce something, ultimately to annihilate. The process of reduction which ends up in an annihilation is described under the word Mahak. Yamhaqullahu riba is the verse, a part of the verse of the Holy Quran, which means that Allah begins to wipe out the institution of interest and will ultimately do so. So Yamhaqa means he begins to reduce, begins to discard and gradually stagger it out. When you say amhaqa rajulo, it means that when it is used in intransitive form, amhaqa rajulo, it means a man died himself, of himself, you know. That means again the same thing, something to completely, to begin to finish and to finish ultimately, completely. In Mahaq al-Qamaru, in Mahaka is the intransitive form of Mahaka. And in this form, when you say the moon began to Mahak, it means that he gradually waned out, darkened ultimately. So Amhaq al-Qamaru, it is also used in transitive form, in intransitive form, but meaning a different thing, not just that the light faded out, but it applies to those nights when after the full night the moon gradually begins to wane out, and that period of moon gradually disappearing is described as Amhaq al-Qamaru. The moon has entered that phase. So the meaning is quite clear from this. Most of the commentators, perhaps almost all of them, have referred this verse to the previous description of tilkal ayyamu nudawiluha bayna nas, and they say here that process is described further, that how the times when they change between people and the good fortunes and bad fortunes, when they rotate among the different people, what they do to them. They bring the process of tamahus to the believers and mahq to the non-believers. but I do not agree with this relationship, because it is Allah Himself who is the perpetrator of both, and who is the subject of both of these. So why to bypass Allah and relate this process to that part of the verse, tilkal ayyamu nudawiluha bainan nas, unnecessarily? It very clearly indicates the difference between trial and and between the wrath of God and His being angry with people. Both temporarily appear to go through the same phase of suffering. Those who are blind, who cannot see things clearly, at that time they begin to mock the Muslims, the believers, and the righteous, that what is the difference? You are also suffering. So if the suffering of people is an indication of God's anger and wrath, then we both share it. So this is the exact situation which emerged from the temporary setback of Uhud. And as I have quoted some Western scholars, they happily dwell upon the description of how the so-called Muslims, the weak among them, as they said, but who were hypocrites, as we know, they started saying openly that if Islam was truth, then why should it have happened? Now that is rebutted by Allah by pointing out that both processes are similar, like both words are also similar in their meaning. A process of gradual a gradual waning out, of staggering out something, a gradual disappearance is common to both words, mahas and mahak, but with exactly the opposite results. Those who experience mahas, those who are put to trial by God, like the trial is described in the word mahas, they always come out stronger than weaker than before. That is a law which is never changed. And those who are put to a sort of trial by God while He was angry with them, they never recover from that trial and go on ultimately being totally wiped out and annihilated. So it's a beautiful small verse where two similar words are put in juxtaposition, one describing one phenomenon and another the similar but opposite phenomenon. And herein lies the answer to all the jeering and mocking, etc., of those who hurt the Prophet ﷺ and the believers after Jang-e-Uhud. The same applies to Jamaat Ahmadiyya in the situation in Pakistan and elsewhere as well occasionally, particularly in Pakistan, because Ahmadis went through a long trial of suffering. Many non-Ahmadis began to taunt them that if you were righteous, if you were true, why have you been subjected to this torment by Allah? The answer is the same. It's a process of mahas, and the result itself testifies to the truth of Ahmadiyyat, because all through this process of trial, Ahmadiyyat is constantly emerging stronger and stronger in quality as well as in number, and as well as the image of Ahmadiyyat is concerned. The difference between now and the past 10 years before, is immense, it's meteoric. You see, 10 years before when we were not subjected to this so-called torment. Ahmadiyyat was almost unheard of in higher circles in Europe and the Western world and Far East and so on and so forth. And also it was not as strong as it is today in African countries and other countries where Ahmadiyyat has been introduced during the last century. But now the difference is immense. What about Russia? What about Eastern Europe and other states of the world? Everywhere Ahmadiyyat has emerged as a much greater and cognizable force than what it was before we were subjected to this trial by Allah. And also in Pakistan, not a single day has dawned when we have reduced in number or in faith. What it has resulted into is a sort of shedding of the falsehood attached to us, intermingled with us. And that is the important part of the word mahas, which should be taken into account. It purifies by shedding out the worst and the rotten, like the process during the fall. Not entirely, but to a degree, when the dead leaves begin to leave the tree. So in case of Ahmadiyyat or in case of any truth, it is not a process of fall which you observe altogether, but a part of the tree goes through that process. So the dead leaves which are attached presently as a part of the tree are made to shed and fall, with the result that ultimately the tree is relieved of all the foreign elements on them, because after a leaf dies it becomes a foreign element. The same process has been described by Hazrat Masih Maud concerning Ahmadiyyat in a beautiful passage where he says, Mere darakht-e wujood ki shakho, that I am the tree of truth, and you, O Ahmadis, are my branches and leaves and so on and so forth. So having said that, at another place he describes the process of dying out of some branches or some leaves, and says that when some branches begin to dry and ultimately die, some leaves go through the same process, while the tree is alive. The gardener would not fell the tree, but he would remove the dead branches, because if they remain attached to the live tree, they would cause death to spread out to other healthy areas. So he cuts them away and puts them to fire, feeds them to fire. So would you be fed to fire? That means that at the time of trial, the weak who have really become dead, they are removed from the healthy body of the truth. And those who are half dead, they are given options, either to return to the faith, much reformed and almost transformed, or to be hastened into their death through their trial. So we have witnessed exactly the same thing happening in Pakistan. Whenever you read the news of some odd number of Ahmadis, 7, 8, 20, 30, having renegaded, I always follow it up, and you should also share that knowledge with me, by investigation as to who they were and what caused them to renegade. In most cases, what emerges from this investigation is that, first of all, the number was always exaggerated. Number two, those who actually renegaded, a large number among them were those who had never had a good contact with Ahmadiyyat at any time. They were like dead leaves attached to the tree. And they never paid chanda, they never participated in prayers, they never came to Jummah, and only socially they were called Ahmadis, but they were not practically Ahmadis. So they were gone, and a dead load off, of course. And some of them who gave in to the pressure, but deep inside they had the belief in Ahmadiyyat intact, they always returned. And this time their return is marked by a large, very visible improvement in their character and faith. So those who return, sometimes they write very pathetic letters of the suffering and torment they undergo. Why did they do this? Under strong pressure, when under threat of their life, property, etc. Sometimes some believers also show weakness, but when they return, they always return as better people than before, and promise never to do this, show this weakness, until death. So this is the process of the Mahasa Yumaheso. When Allah puts His two people, His two servants through such trials, it results into this. But when the non-believers are punished, the outcome is absolutely different. Like some farmer weeding out the alien vegetative presence in his fields, sees to it that the plants are not injured, but they are always shaken up, of course. So I have been a farmer, practically I have been doing it myself, and I have done the weeding out process myself with my own hands. I mean, riding a tractor or some other thing, using some other implement, and however much we try only to weed out the aliens and not to injure the crop, it always results in a very bad shape of the crop immediately after the weeding out is finished. Crestfallen, a very bad shape. And but after a few days, when you revisit your field, you are surprised at the signs of health and prosperity in the field. So that is the process of Mahasa Yumaheso Tamhisan, or is it from the same list? Yumahesa, so that Allah may put through trial and bring out alive and better and stronger those who believe. This would be the meaning. So this is enough answer and complete answer, as I said earlier, to the jeerings of the people at that time and also the jeerings of the Orientalists today. Am hasibtum an tadkhulul jannata wa lamma ya'lamillahu allazina jahadu minkum wa ya'lamu as-sabirin. I don't think there is any word here which needs to be described in depth, because already we have treated the word ilm and we have also treated the word Jannah extensively. So you know the meaning. It means, do you really suppose that you will be made to enter the heavens while Allah has not yet, according to this translation, caused you to be distinguished? The Yalama causes this problem. Yalama means so that Allah may know. Without Allah knowing, the translation here would be, can you expect to enter Jannah without Allah knowing which of you has actually striven in His path and who among you is truly patient? Now the difficulty which faces the translators is Allah knows everything. So how should Allah know? Wait to know. There is one commentator who seems to have understood this verse correctly, and I'll quote from him. Yes, Ibn Qayyim. As I explained earlier, the knowledge of God is based on truth, on something which has happened. And if it were not to happen, then there will be no knowledge of God regarding that which is not true. So something must happen. Otherwise, the knowledge of God is without support, without meaning, and that is not a knowledge. That is just some guesswork and nothing more. So because Allah's knowledge is based on facts, that is why that knowledge is always true and correct. So unless the facts happen, that knowledge is not supported with the evidence of the fact. So Allah cannot take action on something which is yet in the process of making. Unless that something has appeared in that form, Allah will not take an action just because He knows that something would happen. So unless that things happens in the future, which Allah knew about earlier, the action from God is not warranted, not justified. This is what Ibn Qayyim has also written. He says, खुदा महज अपने इल्म की बिना पर जज़ा नहीं देता जब तक कि उसका मालूम वक़ू में ना आ जाए. God does not punish or reward anyone just on the basis of his knowledge that somebody would do this or do that, until that something does take place and perpetrate. So this is a very correct understanding of this verse, and in that context the translation should not be, as is we find in our translation and many others as well, not yet caused to be distinguished. Yalama is not a process, it does not indicate that God wants them to be distinguished. Yalama means Allah waits until that which He knows will happen, happens. And that turns into an ilm which is shared with Allah by all the others as well. That becomes ilm, and in this context the word yalama is used. Yalama sabirin also, the patience among those who are patient. Now, as the process of yumahisa indicates trial, so the following verse also should have a reference to that behavior in trial. And sabir is just that, a person who is steadfast in the face of difficulties and trials and pains. So Allah says, Allah knew, of course, that when you will be put to trial, there will be those who would strive hard and will not be defeated in spirit, and those who will suffer steadfastly in patience, with patience. And the process of Yumahis has produced this. Allah was awaiting this to happen. Then will follow your reward. And that reward, of course, as we know, did follow. وَلَقَدْ كُنْتُمْ تَمَنَّوْنَ الْمَوْتَ مِنْ قَبْلِ أَنْ تَلْقَوْهُ فَقَدْ رَأَيْتُمُوهُ وَأَنْتُمْ تَنْظُرُونَ. And you used to wish for such a death before you met it. Now you have seen it face to face, then why some of you seek to avoid it? Here again, the translation is to be taken with a pinch of salt. The word death here is not the correct translation of the word moth, although it is literal translation of the word moth. Correct in the sense that in this context, the word moth should be translated differently, as also the Arabs use this word to indicate wars and battles. So here, because the battles and wars end up in moth, so sometimes the word moth is used to indicate a very severe battle where you face death. So facing the death does not mean that every soldier has death before him. It means potentially everyone can die. And because this potential remains hanging on the head of every person who joins a battle, so that battle is described as moth in general. So here it is not that they wanted death. Hazrat Rasul Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam had repeatedly admonished his followers not to wish death. And because Shahada is mentioned as life, not death, it is also prohibited to describe those who die as dead. But it is, Allah says, Bal ahyaun, they are alive. So Shahadat is a life-giving process and not death-inflicting process. So Sahaba never wished for death, but they wished for battle against the non-believers. And as many a commentator has pointed out, here mostly those are referred to who could not participate in the Battle of Badr. And as you know, the Battle of Badr won many laurels to those who participated in that battle. Some achieved martyrdom, some returned victorious as great warriors, victorious warriors of Islam. So they must have been talking of those days, and that caused many yearnings and heartburns among the younger people or some older ones as well, who for some reason or other could not participate in the Battle of Badr. So it was they, according to most commentators, who are referred to as who wished and yearned for battle. Now that also is not good. To wish death is forbidden, positively and categorically by Muhammad. You must never wish death. So Sahaba could not have wished death, and it is Sahaba who are referred to. So they are referred to as having wished something is not their wishing of death, but the wishing of battle. But even that is discouraged very strongly. You should not pray to Allah that He should put you to trials like inflicting, involving you in warfare and battles, etc. When it comes, then of course you have to be patient and you face it bravely, but you should not wish for it. But some youth, untrained and younger generation people maybe, they wished for that. Maybe some odd old people also yearning to be in Badr also said, all right, next time when it comes. In that sense, they were wishing death, that is, wishing war. So Allah says, this is the result of your wishing. Those who wish, when it comes, they do not show their mettle. So the wishing of such things is very close to boastfulness, though not exactly that. If you wish that I want to face and confront difficulties and trials and see how I emerge, that is a sort of false bravery, which is bragging rather than genuinely wishing something. And because it is very close and an observer from outside cannot exactly define the nature of one's wish. So one should abstain from saying that you are wishing it just out of your displaying your metal falsely. You do not genuinely find yourself up to such situations, but only you are bragging about these things. Allah has pointed out here the reason why it is discouraged. Allah knows human psyche better than anyone else. So He says, when these people indulge in such talks, if time comes we will do this, if time comes we will do that, they are not generally the people who show patience and steadfastness. They are the people who either fail or sometimes are stunned by the situation. So here again I must point out that the commentators have generally understood the word tanzurun in a context in which the Holy Quran does not use it. Tanzurun does not mean that you ran away from this. Tanzurun is a state where you keep yourself find yourself looking on, in a sort of state of paralysis or inaction, where you seem to be stunned by a situation which has suddenly developed before you and you can't do anything about it. Tanzurun is never applied to a person who runs away from death. But unfortunately, some of the commentators, not all, many have not used this and expressed this view, but some have, that Tanzurun applies to those of the Muslims who fled from the field of battle. It does not. In fact, it describes the state of mind of believers who were suddenly stunned by the changing of fortunes. The transformation from victory to apparent defeat was so quick and so sudden that they were dazed, and they could not do anything, they could not think of doing anything. So Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had to call them back to Himself. So they were not all flying from Him. They were rendered inactive and innocuous. They were almost paralyzed. Many sat in some place here and there and wondered what had happened. And they could not realize it. So the historians tell us that, for instance, I'll quote some examples of what actually was happening at that time and what are the people who were described. So this description applies to, number one, those who wished for battles to show their mettle and show their superiority, and they failed to do so. Tanzurun means they failed to do what they so much bragged about, or if bragging is a very tough, rather a tough word, they found themselves not in a position to perform what they thought they would, the way they thought they would. Instead of facing death boldly and attacking it, they were in a position of sort of inactivity and stunned to see what was happening. And that means it applies to the second part of Uhud, not to the first part. The first part showed that they genuinely desired to do something. But then the worst teeth of the battle were not yet bared. They joined the onslaught of the Muslims along with Muhammad ﷺ, which suddenly resulted in the total decimation of the enemy, resulting into their fleeing from the field and running away in havoc and in chaos. So until then, the weak among them were also a part of the warriors who won these laurels, because the death had not yet bared her fangs to them, as it does sometimes. In the second phase, when the enemy turned back and when Khalid bin Walid attacked from the rear, then suddenly they knew what death was. That is, the true meaning of war dawned upon them. And that was the state. Whatever happened was out of a state of being dazed. Not genuine cowardice was displayed. That is why they were all forgiven. So what I am pointing out is that Tanzurun does not indicate conscious running away. They were not bad people. They were untrained people. They were genuine believers who are referred to. So what they did was that they simply couldn't understand what was happening to them. And their running away was a state of helplessness resulting from that state of being dazed. So Tanzurun is a state which can result ultimately into your vacating the battlefield, but directly it does not indicate running away process. Among them, of course, were exceptions, and who stood out so beautifully and brilliantly that they will always remembered in the history of Islam with such pride as would never fade out. One of them was Hazrat Anas bin Nadr. When he saw the Muslims all scattered out and not knowing what to do, there was a state of chaos, he asked someone what had happened. And the person from whom to whom he put this question turned to him and said, "Don't you know that our Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has been martyred?" Hazrat Anas turned back to him and said, "If he has been martyred, he has reached the ultimate goal. That is what he stood for. And it does not mean that you should run away. You should follow him where he has gone. That is the only answer. To run away is nonsensical. It does not conclude from this. You loved a leader who always invited you to martyrdom, and you say he has been martyred, so he reached his achieved his object. And when he has achieved his object, for you to abandon him would be the ultimate folly. So come on, let's go and seek the same the same distinction of achieving martyrdom. And now what he said was beautiful. So he alone attacked a body of the enemy soldiers and was wounded repeatedly until he reached martyrdom and never looked back. That was one single soldier who represented almost the entire Muslim army at that moment. About another, it is said that he also, sitting dazed on a stone, was eating dates. Now that was the extent of how they were confused and perplexed. The battle was lost apparently, but they did not run away from the battlefield. Nothing, as if nothing else was left, he started eating dates. Then somebody was passing by and said, "What happened?" He said, "Rasulullah Sallam has got martyred." He said, "Then between me and martyrdom, this is the date which is standing." Chucked it away. No more of this. Again he ran into the enemy forces and got martyred. How could such people be described as tanzurun? So the word tanzurun only indicates some people who were dazed and put into inaction, but that does not mean that they fled from the battlefield. Some very beautiful things happened on that day. As I said, the true inherent qualities of Muhammad shone out like they had never shone out before. So also it happened in the case of his followers. One of them who rushed to the battlefield to meet eternity said something while he was going. He said, "Why are you running away after Rasulullah Sallam has died, if he has died?" And then he turned to God and said, "Oh Allah, I am fed up of what they are doing. I absolve myself completely from such stupid people who are leaving the battlefield because Rasulullah Sallam has met martyrdom. So I seek forgiveness with them. I absolve myself from all responsibility." And saying that, ultimately he was also martyred. Let me see if I might have missed something. Hazrat Muslim Maud says that it is a sort of a verse which encourages them to fight on. It says, "This is what you wanted, now it has come to you, so go ahead and perform your, fulfill your promises." But it seems to be a bit difficult to fully understand, because this verse was revealed after the battle and it could not have applied backdated to the situation, even if it were revealed during the battle. Rasulullah Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did not mention it to anybody at that time. There is no evidence. So what it may mean in this sense, it could mean that would be that having drawn their lesson from Uhud, Allah is telling them in future to behave like this. But it would be a little bit extended meaning. Anyway, Hazrat Muslim Maud has proposed it, so there would be some substance in it.